Before I even start this review, I'm just going to point out that Our Life Beginnings and Always is free on Steam and itch.io, so if at any point during this review you find the premise interesting and think you may want to give the game a try, please feel free to do so, as you don't have to pay anything to try it out. There are DLC packs that expand the title, but you should be able to get a good enough feel from the base game to know if you want to get further involved with these characters and their stories. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I don't have something of a soft spot for visual novels, as I do, and I recognize that these are not games that everyone's going to get into. With that being said, I remembered hearing about the title some time ago and seeing its Kickstarter. Unfortunately, I didn't become aware of it until after the Kickstarter had already ended, which is a shame, as now that I have played through the game in its entirety, including the expansions that have been released so far, I have to say that it's extremely well done, and my heart legitimately melted as I experienced its story. Some have attempted to categorize Our Life as an otome game, but I would have to disagree, as in most otome games you are a female protagonist courting multiple male love interests. Our Life is very different, as the focus of the game isn't really about romance at all, though it can factor into your story should you wish it to. In the game, you will play as an avatar of customizable gender, race, pronoun, etc., and will be able to further customize them as the story progresses. Very early in your story, you will meet Cove, a young, lonely boy who has moved into your town after his parents split up. After this short introduction, you'll be thrown into the game as a whole, where you will grow up alongside this boy who is your neighbor, and as the story further progresses, you will define what your relationship to him is. This relationship could be many things, be it friends, more than friends, or nearly complete strangers. The game is currently split into 3 acts, with a 4th act to be released at a later time for free. The acts in the game will follow your character and Cove as you both progress in life from age 8 in Act 1, 13 in Act 2, and 18 in Act 3. At the start of each act, you will be able to decide how you personally feel about Cove and how you interact with him. The left bar you see here gives you options to be nervous, comfortable, and direct. These won't change your relationship, but more how your character interacts with those around you. Choosing nervous will make your character a bit more reserved, relaxed will make you a bit more easygoing, and direct will make you, well, direct. The bar on the right reflects how your character feels about Cove. If you start off indifferent to Cove, your 2 characters will be around each other, but won't exactly be friends. You'll see what happens in his life, but he'll always be at arm's length. Move this up to having a fondness for him, and the 2 characters will become closer, more friendly, changing their interactions as well as their dialogue. Moving this further up, if you decide that your character has become interested in Cove romantically, you can move this to crush status, and your avatar will begin to act accordingly. You can eventually move this even further up to love, but this won't be available at the start of the game. I've gone through a few scenarios messing around with the settings and seeing how things change, and couldn't help but relate to the main character when they turn into a bumbling fool if they have a nervous crush on Cove. Whatever your decisions though, it's worth noting that while your comfort with Cove can be changed from act to act, your actual interest can only be moved up. So if you decide that you're going to move your character into crush status, you won't be able to move it back down after it's done. Each act by default has 5 different events that you and Cove have some sort of significant interaction in. Whether this be your family's going on vacation or Cove attempting to run away, each one will give you more insight into these characters, how they've lived, and who they are. The first 2 acts also have DLC that provide 5 additional events specific to that act, and additional DLC should soon be released for Act 3 as well. So if you find yourself enjoying your time with these characters and their story, I highly recommend getting these additions as they are great expansions to the story and will actually help support the developer since the base game is free. As time goes on and you move from one act to another, your relationship with Cove and how you've interacted with him so far will reflect directly upon him. His style, his interests, and his attitude will change depending on how you've treated him. Now, I'm not going to say that his entire personality will go through some massive metamorphosis based solely on what you say, but these things can change whether or not Cove is a bit more bookish or if he likes to play sports. Along with this, Cove isn't the only one who will change throughout the journey. Your own personal character also changes as time goes on. Their appearance, their sexuality, their gender identity, all of it can be tailored to reflect the way you want your character's story to be, and the other characters will react accordingly. This mechanic ends up making your interactions feel unique. If you aren't quite certain how you feel about Cove and decide to be somewhat reserved in the first act, then your Cove will in kind be somewhat cold and distant, as he's not comfortable being with you either. If you warm up to him, then he'll be more friendly, but will still remember the fact that you weren't very close in your childhood. And through these interactions, you'll find that things change from act to act. And this is the crux of the story. You see, our life, though prominently focusing on this relationship as the two of these characters grow up, it's also about their families, and the people who come into and leave their lives. The supporting cast makes these characters feel like a cohesive whole, as they don't always get along, and their personalities change as time goes on as well. Your sister may be dismissive of you as she reaches her teenage years. You don't always agree with your parents' decisions, and that's part of what gives the game something special. A spirit that most games of this type simply don't have. As mentioned in the beginning of this review, this game is a visual novel, and it's not going to be for everyone. But if you think that a relatively lighthearted story about growing up and how relationships change with time might interest you, then I think you'll be pleased with what you find here.